What if I told you that a sitting U.S. senator once beat a colleague unconscious with a metal cane on the Senate floor and received fan mail canes as a reward? Or that the government literally poisoned its own citizens to stop them from drinking? Or that a 17-year-old Boy Scout built a nuclear reactor in his mom's garden shed and the EPA had to bury the whole shed in a nuclear waste facility in Utah? That is just 3 of the 111 most jaw-dropping, face-palming, "I cannot believe this actually happened" moments in American history. And it only gets wilder from here. Smash that hype button right now, like the US Army smashed its own buildings trying to put out a fire. Because the more people who see this, the more Americans will finally know just how spectacularly dumb their own history really is. 1. President John Tyler got kicked out of his own political party while still sitting in the Oval Office. His entire cabinet resigned on the exact same day, all at once, like a coordinated breakup text. He had to run the entire United States completely alone, with 0 party support, 0 allies, and 0 friends in Washington. Somehow this man still showed up to work every single morning like nothing happened. 2. From 1917 to 1952, the US government was literally paying hunters cash bounties to shoot and kill bald eagles. The reasoning was that eagles were eating too many salmon, and fishermen were complaining. Over 128,000 bald eagles were slaughtered before someone in the government finally looked up and realized they were funding a massacre of the national symbol of the United States of America. Nobody caught that for 35 years. 3. In 1872, Victoria Woodhull decided to run for U.S. president, and the government responded by throwing her in jail on Election Day on obscenity charges. She sat locked in a cell while people were out there actually voting for her. The wildest part is she ran a full 48 years before women could even legally vote for anybody in this country. She was campaigning for the highest office while the law said her own vote did not count. 4. Kodak engineers invented the digital camera in 1975, and their own executives buried it immediately. The bosses were terrified it would kill their beloved film business, so they locked the invention away for 20 years. Meanwhile, competitors figured out digital cameras on their own, launched them to the world, and absolutely destroyed Kodak in the market. The company collapsed anyway, and exactly like the executives feared, except now they had nothing because they threw away their own golden ticket first. 5. The US government detonated a nuclear bomb called Upshot Knothole Harry, and radioactive fallout rained down across 5,000 square miles of real American towns with real American families living in them. People stepped outside and found mysterious white dust coating their skin, their cars, their homes, their children. Government officials showed up and looked residents dead in the eyes and told them the white radioactive powder covering everything was completely harmless. Nobody questioned it. 6. In 1904, American doctors became genuinely terrified of something called bicycle face. These were licensed medical professionals who wrote actual published books, warning the entire country that women who rode bicycles would permanently freeze their faces into a horrified grimace from the physical strain. They described the condition in clinical detail. They gave it a medical name. They distributed these warnings through serious academic channels while completely straight-faced, as if they had discovered a real disease threatening womankind. 7. A sitting U.S. senator named Preston Brooks walked directly onto the Senate floor in 1856 and beat a fellow senator named Charles Sumner completely unconscious with a thick metal cane. This happened inside the actual United States Senate chamber. Brooks hit him so many times Sumner could not return to work for years. Then the mail started arriving at Brooks's office. Dozens of admiring supporters from across the country sent him brand new commemorative canes as gifts to celebrate what he did. 8. Benjamin Franklin sat down to debate what bird should represent the entire United States of America and argued passionately for the turkey. He called the bald eagle a coward with genuinely bad moral character. His specific complaint was that the eagle regularly gets chased away from its own food by birds dramatically smaller than itself and simply lets it happen. Franklin felt this was embarrassing and undignified for a national symbol. America chose the cowardly eagle anyway and has never looked back. 9. President James Buchanan watched southern states begin legally seceding from the United States and did absolutely nothing. His own legal team confirmed the secessions were completely illegal. They then also confirmed Buchanan had no personal power to stop any of it. So he accepted both findings, sat down in his chair, and watched the entire country split apart in real time right in front of him. He served out his remaining days as president of a country actively dissolving around him. 10. During World War II, the U.S. military built an entire fake ghost army out of inflatable rubber tanks, rubber airplanes, and completely fabricated radio traffic. The whole operation was commanded by General Patton and designed specifically to fool Adolf Hitler about where the D-Day invasion would actually land. Hitler believed every single bit of it. The most feared and sophisticated military force in the entire world got completely outsmarted by a bunch of balloon tanks and some guys with radios making stuff up. 11. Tennessee passed a law in 1925 making it an actual criminal offense to teach evolution inside a public school. A biology teacher named John Scopes decided to test the law anyway and got himself put on criminal trial for explaining basic science to teenagers. The courtroom became the most watched legal circus in American history, with reporters flooding in from everywhere. The whole country tuned in to watch Tennessee put a school teacher on trial for teaching from a biology textbook. 12. MySpace had the opportunity to purchase Facebook in 2005 for a reported $75 million, and the executives passed on it completely. They looked at Mark Zuckerberg's creation and called it a fad. For teenagers with absolutely no future, MySpace's parent company News Corp walked away from that deal and is now worth a fraction of what Facebook alone generates in a single week of normal business operations. That one meeting in 2005 is studied in business schools as a masterclass in catastrophic decision-making. 13. NASA built a $125 million Mars spacecraft and sent it directly into the planet because one engineering team was using metric units and a completely separate team was using imperial measurements. Nobody on the entire project ever once stopped to ask whether both teams were working in the same system. The spacecraft entered the Martian atmosphere at the completely wrong angle and was destroyed instantly. An entire planet mission worth over $100 million was lost over a units conversion nobody bothered to check. 14. In 1954, a mass hysteria swept through Seattle, where thousands of residents flooded police phone lines reporting mysterious pits and damage appearing overnight in their car windshields. Detectives investigated seriously. Scientists were consulted. The city was genuinely alarmed. After extensive investigation, authorities concluded that Seattle residents had simply started looking directly at their windshields closely for the very first time in their lives and were noticing normal everyday damage that had always been there the entire time. 15. The CIA decided the best person to consult about covert operations was a professional stage magician, and they hired a man named John Mulholland and paid him to write a classified instruction manual teaching agents how to secretly slip poison into someone's drink and pick pockets without being detected. This top-secret government document written by a Las Vegas-style illusionist stayed completely classified for 50 full years before anyone outside the agency ever learned it existed. 16. The U.S. Navy in 1814 was so completely unprepared for the British attack on Washington, D.C., that the entire American militia defending the nation's capital turned around and ran before the British soldiers even physically arrived. Soldiers threw their weapons on the ground and sprinted away so fast that the retreat became legendary and was officially nicknamed the Bladensburg Races. The British then walked into an undefended Washington, D.C. and burned the White House down at a completely relaxed pace. 17. President William McKinley was shot by an assassin in 1901, and doctors confirmed he was actually recovering well from his wounds. There was a brand new working X-ray machine sitting in the exact same building that could have located the bullet immediately. His doctors refused to use it because the technology was too new and unfamiliar to them. McKinley died weeks later from a spreading infection caused entirely by the bullet. His doctors never found because they would not use the machine 10 feet away. 18. In 1962, a U.S. Air Force base accidentally triggered a nuclear launch alarm, sending fully armed bombers scrambling at top speed directly towards Soviet territory. And these were real planes carrying real nuclear weapons flying toward a real superpower during the tensest period of the entire Cold War. The all-clear signal reached the pilots with only seconds remaining before they crossed the point of no return. The difference between that Tuesday and nuclear war was measured in literal seconds. 19. Abraham Lincoln declared Thanksgiving a national holiday in 1863, and the country celebrated it happily for 76 years with no fixed calendar date. Then Franklin Roosevelt decided in 1939 to move it 1 week earlier to extend the Christmas shopping season. Several states refused to recognize the change and kept the original date. That year, America had two completely separate official Thanksgiving days, happening simultaneously in different states, and families across the country genuinely did not agree on which Thursday to eat turkey. 20. Atari dug a massive secret pit in the New Mexico desert in 1983 and buried millions upon millions of unsold cartridges of their E.T. video game, because it was so catastrophically terrible that nobody would buy it. The game was so bad it nearly collapsed the entire American video game industry by itself. An entire thriving billion-dollar market almost ceased to exist permanently because one company made one game so unplayably awful that it traumatized an entire generation of children. 21. The Smithsonian Institution refused to officially credit the Wright brothers as the first humans to achieve powered flight for 38 consecutive years. The reason was deeply embarrassing. The Smithsonian had previously funded their own curator's flying machine project, and when it failed completely, they simply refused to admit they backed the wrong inventor. Two bicycle mechanics from Ohio changed human history forever, and the most prestigious museum in America spent nearly 4 decades pretending it did not happen because of institutional pride. 22. The entire Lockheed aircraft factory in Burbank, California, was hidden from Japanese bombers during World War II by covering the massive roof with a completely fake suburban neighborhood. Workers installed fake houses, fake trees, fake roads, all in fake lawns made entirely from painted burlap stretched across the building. Japanese aerial reconnaissance flew directly over it and saw nothing unusual. An entire functioning military aircraft factory disappeared underneath a fake neighborhood, and the disguise worked so perfectly it became a model for future wartime concealment operations. 23. Congress passed the Comstock Act in 1873, making it a federal crime to mail any information about birth control through the United States Postal Service. A nurse named Margaret Sanger was arrested and faced serious federal prison time simply for mailing pamphlets explaining to women how their own reproductive systems biologically functioned. The United States government treated basic human anatomy information as criminal obscenity and sent law enforcement after a nurse for trying to educate women about their own bodies. 24. The Segway personal transporter was hyped so aggressively before its launch that Steve Jobs personally predicted it would be bigger than the personal computer. Jeff Bezos invested his own money into it. Technology journalists called it the most important invention in decades. The Segway then spent 20 years on the market and sold fewer total units than Ford sells F-150 pickup trucks on a completely average slow Tuesday afternoon. It is now remembered exclusively as something mall security guards reluctantly ride. 25. Saw President Grover Cleveland personally answer the White House telephone himself every single time it rang, because he considered it completely undignified for any staff member to answer his personal calls. This was the sitting president of the United States picking up his own phone like a man waiting for a job callback. The truly remarkable part is that this same telephone-obsessed president was somehow elected twice, serving as both the 22nd and the 24th president with a completely different man holding the office in between. 26. The American general commanding the invasion of Canada during the War of 1812 arrived at his fort with a full army ready to fight and then surrendered everything to a much smaller British force without firing a single shot in defense. He handed over his entire garrison, his weapons, and his dignity without any battle occurring whatsoever. He was brought back to the United States, court-martialed, found completely guilty, and sentenced to death by firing squad for the most bloodless surrender in military history. 27. A professor walked into the Indiana State Legislature in 1897 and calmly explained that he had mathematically discovered the true correct value of pi was exactly 3.2. The Indiana House of Representatives listened carefully and then passed the bill unanimously without a single objection. The legislation defining the value of pi by government law was moving through the Senate when a visiting mathematician from Purdue University happened to be in the building, heard what was happening, and physically stopped the vote before Indiana legally redefined mathematics. 28. The 3 Mile Island nuclear meltdown in 1979 was made dramatically and unnecessarily worse because the control room had over 600 different alarms, all screaming simultaneously at the operators. Workers standing inside the facility had absolutely no idea which of the 600 blaring alerts represented the actual critical emergency, because nobody who designed the system had ever thought to create any method of prioritizing which alarms mattered most. The most dangerous nuclear accident in American history was partially caused by too many warning bells ringing at once. 29. The fake suburban neighborhood camouflage covering the Lockheed Burbank aircraft factory during World War II worked so extraordinarily well that American military officials who wanted to inspect the facility from the air flew directly over the building they had just physically walked out of minutes earlier and genuinely could not locate it from above. Officers who had been standing inside the factory could not identify it from an airplane. The disguise fooled the people who built it just as completely as it fooled the enemy. 30. In the 1890s, millions of Americans became completely convinced that wearing wool flannel underwear every single day year-round was the key to preventing disease and maintaining good health. This included wearing the scratchy wool garments throughout the entire summer in the American heat. Now, health reformers sold specially branded sanitary wool undergarments through mail-order catalogs. Actual licensed physicians prescribed itchy wool underwear as legitimate medical treatment. An entire generation of Americans spent their summers slowly roasting inside wool while believing it was making them healthier. 31. A man named Emanuel Ninger became the most skilled counterfeiter in American history by hand-painting fake currency bills one at a time, using a fine brush with such extraordinary precision that they passed inspection for years. Banks accepted them. Merchants accepted them. Nobody caught anything suspicious for a long time. He was finally caught in 1896 because a bartender noticed that Ninger's wet hands were making the ink bleed on a $50 bill. Years of perfect criminal artistry ended because of one slightly damp handshake. 32. The original design for the Statue of Liberty was actually an Egyptian peasant woman holding a torch meant to stand at the entrance of the Suez Canal in Egypt. Egypt looked at the proposal and rejected it immediately for being far too expensive. The sculptor Frederick Bartholdi took the exact same design, the exact same robed female figure holding the exact same torch, pitched it directly to America, renamed her Liberty, and Americans accepted enthusiastically. The most iconic American symbol in the world was Egypt's rejected leftovers. 33. President Andrew Johnson's impeachment acquittal in 1868 came down to a single solitary vote in the Senate. One senator cast the deciding vote that kept Johnson in office and saved his presidency. That same senator was immediately and completely destroyed politically for his decision. He received death threats regularly for years afterward. His constituents never forgave him. He was never elected to any public office again for the rest of his life. One vote saved a presidency and permanently ended the career of the man who cast it. 34. During the Spanish-American War in Cuba, yellow fever was killing American soldiers at a faster rate than Spanish bullets were. The Army desperately needed answers, so they designed a solution that was equal parts brave and completely insane. They asked for volunteer soldiers to deliberately sit still and allow mosquitoes they knew were infected with yellow fever to bite them repeatedly. Volunteers agreed. The experiment worked, proving mosquitoes were the cause. And the men who let themselves get purposely infected saved thousands of future American lives. 35. The U.S. federal government handed the Central Pacific Railroad 9 million acres of completely free land and $24 million in loans in 1862 as an incentive to build the Transcontinental Railroad. The railroad accepted everything gratefully and then used its total monopoly over California shipping to charge farmers such outrageously high prices to transport their own harvested crops that it triggered a full-scale violent rebellion. The government gave a company everything it needed to become so powerful, it made the government look helpless. 36. So when Sylvan Goldman invented the shopping cart in 1937 and installed them in his Oklahoma grocery store, he discovered that actual real customers absolutely refused to use them. People walked past the carts completely ignoring them. Goldman investigated and learned that customers genuinely believed using a cart was a public admission that they were either too poor or too physically weak to carry their own groceries like a capable adult. Goldman had to hire paid actors to casually push carts around the store before real customers finally felt comfortable trying one. 37. In 1962, the United States military detonated a hydrogen bomb called Starfish Prime 250 miles above the Pacific Ocean just to see what would happen. What happened was that the blast instantly knocked out streetlights across Hawaii. I disabled multiple orbiting satellites that several countries depended on and accidentally created an entirely new man-made radiation belt around the entire Earth. That radiation belt persisted in orbit for years afterward. The military essentially wrapped a radioactive ring around the planet as an accidental souvenir of their experiment. 38. The Ouija board received an official United States patent in 1891. But the patent examiner was deeply skeptical and refused to approve it until the inventor demonstrated the board actually worked. The inventor brought the board into the patent office, sat down with the examiner, and the board allegedly spelled out the patent examiner's full name during the live demonstration. The examiner sat in silence for a moment, then signed the patent paperwork immediately. Nobody in that room apparently asked any follow-up questions about what had just happened. 39. The Teapot Dome scandal of 1922 became historic when a sitting U.S. Secretary of the Interior named Albert Fall became the first cabinet member in American history to be sent to federal prison while in office. Fall had secretly handed over government-controlled oil reserves to private oil companies in exchange for cash bribes delivered in a black bag. He accepted money, handed over national resources, got caught, got convicted, and went to prison. The oil companies he accepted bribes from were never criminally charged for paying them. 40. During World War I, American anti-German hysteria reached such a fever pitch that ordinary everyday German words became socially unacceptable across the entire country. Upper sauerkraut was officially renamed Liberty Cabbage in restaurants and grocery stores. Dachshund dogs were called Liberty Dogs by their owners in public. German measles were renamed Liberty Measles in newspapers and government health documents. Americans were so angry at Germany that they declared war on the German language itself and started renaming vegetables, dog breeds, and childhood illnesses. 41. President Zachary Taylor attended a blazing hot outdoor July 4th celebration in Washington, D.C. in 1850 and decided the best way to cool down was to consume enormous quantities of raw cherries and iced milk in the summer heat. He developed severe gastroenteritis almost immediately. Doctors were called. Treatments were applied. Nothing worked. Taylor died 5 days later, having served only 16 months of his presidency. The 12th president of the United States was essentially taken down by a bowl of cherries and a glass of cold milk. 42. In 1961, a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber broke apart mid-flight over Goldsboro, North Carolina, and released 2 fully armed hydrogen bombs that fell toward the ground below. One of those bombs automatically went through every single arming step required to detonate, except for one final switch. A single low-voltage switch was the only physical barrier standing between that Tuesday morning in North Carolina and a nuclear explosion on American soil. The Air Force quietly confirmed years later that the bomb came extraordinarily close to detonating. 43. In 1893, the United States Supreme Court gathered the finest legal minds in the country and issued an official ruling declaring that the tomato is legally a vegetable. Every botanist in America agreed the tomato was biologically and scientifically a fruit. The justices acknowledged the science and overruled it anyway purely to justify collecting higher tariff revenue on tomato imports. The highest court in the land looked directly at established science, decided tax money was more important, and legally reclassified a fruit as a vegetable by majority vote. 44. The XFL Football League launched in February 2001 with massive financial backing, celebrity involvement, and wall-to-wall media coverage promising to revolutionize American sports entertainment. Ratings were enormous for the very first game. Then the second game aired and ratings dropped by half. They kept dropping every single week after that. The entire league shut down permanently after only 8 weeks of play, having lost $100 million. The XFL lasted roughly the same amount of time as a standard NFL regular season, without the playoffs. 45. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington state opened in July 1940, and engineers were extremely proud of their sleek, modern design. 4 months later, a moderately strong wind started blowing, and the bridge began twisting and rippling like a ribbon in a breeze. The entire span shook itself apart on camera in one of the most filmed engineering disasters in history. Engineers had never once tested what wind resonance would do to a suspension bridge design, and discovered the catastrophic answer when their actual bridge fell into the water below. 46. In the 1850s, American doctors began selling electric belts designed to be worn strapped around the human waist, delivering continuous mild electrical shocks to the body throughout the day. These were marketed with complete medical seriousness as clinically proven cures for baldness, paralysis, deafness, and impotence simultaneously. Physicians recommended them. Patients believed them. Over 10,000 units were sold to real people who strapped electric shock devices to their bodies every morning and wore them all day, genuinely expecting their hair to grow back and their hearing to return. 47. The largest unsolved art theft in American history happened in Boston in 1990 when 2 men put on police uniforms, walked through the front door of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, showed their fake badges to the security guard, tied the guards up, and spent 81 minutes calmly removing 13 artworks worth $500 million from the walls. They walked out, drove away, and disappeared completely. 35 years later, not a single painting has ever been recovered, and not a single confirmed suspect has ever been charged. 48. In January 1919, a massive steel storage tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses exploded without warning in Boston, sending a 15-foot wall of thick, sticky liquid surging through the streets at 35 miles per hour. The molasses wave-crushed buildings, knocked over elevated rail supports, and killed 21 people while injuring 150 more. Cleanup crews spent weeks scrubbing molasses off every surface in the neighborhood. Residents reportedly claimed for years afterward that on hot summer days the streets of Boston still smelled faintly of molasses. 49. President Franklin Pierce had such a spectacularly terrible presidency that when his term ended, his own Democratic Party looked at his record, looked at the upcoming election, and decided they would rather lose than run him again. Pierce became the only elected sitting president in the entire history of the United States to be denied renomination by his own party. His own people, the politicians who had previously supported and campaigned for him, collectively decided that literally anyone else on Earth would be a better candidate than their current president. 50. In 1950, the U.S. Army secretly released live bacteria over the city of San Francisco to test how efficiently a biological weapon would spread through a dense civilian population without anyone knowing. Real people walking through real San Francisco streets were unknowingly inhaling government-released bacteria during the experiment. At least one hospitalized patient died from a resulting infection. The Army classified the entire operation, and the citizens of San Francisco had no idea their own government had used their city as a biological weapons testing ground. 51. The United States purchased the Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917 by handing over $25 million worth of pure gold. The primary motivation was not tourism, not resources, and not goodwill toward the Danish people. American military planners were genuinely terrified that Germany would seize the islands during World War I and use them as submarine bases to attack shipping along the entire east coast of the United States. America essentially bought a Caribbean island chain as a defensive move against submarines that never actually showed up. 52. Coca-Cola needed a name for their first ever diet soda, launched in 1963. And their solution was to feed random letter combinations into a computer program and see what came out. The computer generated the word tab. Executives stared at it, confirmed it meant absolutely nothing, referred to nothing, and represented nothing whatsoever, and then decided it sounded modern and futuristic enough to put on millions of cans. Tab went on to become one of the most recognized beverage brands in America, despite its name being complete, meaningless gibberish selected by a machine. 53. A CIA officer named Philip A.G. decided he disagreed with the agency's activities and responded by writing and publishing a book in 1975 that named hundreds of undercover CIA operatives working secretly around the world and blew every single one of their covers simultaneously. The CIA was furious and wanted to stop him. Their lawyers investigated and discovered the United States had absolutely no law making it illegal to publish classified intelligence information. AG published freely, named names openly, and the government had no legal mechanism to do anything about it. 54. The satanic panic of the 1980s reached such extraordinary levels of institutional seriousness that actual FBI agents with real federal badges spent significant working hours sitting in dark rooms, playing rock music albums backward through turntables searching for hidden satanic commands embedded in the recordings. Law enforcement agencies across the country built formal official training programs teaching detectives the specific technique of identifying backward-masked satanic messages hidden inside popular music. The Federal Bureau of Investigation devoted genuine resources to playing Judas Priest records in reverse. 55. John Dillinger was locked inside the supposedly escape-proof Crown Point County Jail in Indiana in 1934 and decided to leave. And he carved a fake pistol out of a wooden washboard he found in his cell and colored it black using shoe polish. He walked out holding the fake wooden gun, bluffed his way past armed guards, strolled through the jail, walked directly to the parking lot, climbed into the sheriff's brand new personal car, and drove away. The most wanted criminal in America escaped maximum security using a painted piece of wood. 56. In 1992, two sociology professors published a peer-reviewed academic paper in a serious scholarly journal arguing with statistical evidence that cities with higher country music radio listenership had measurably higher suicide rates. The paper was taken completely seriously by the academic community. National media picked up the story and covered it extensively. Other researchers attempted to study the findings. The paper was never successfully refuted and was never successfully confirmed either, and exists permanently in the academic record as one of the strangest published studies in American sociological history. 57. President Woodrow Wilson suffered a massive stroke in October 1919 that left him largely unable to perform his presidential duties for the remaining 18 months of his term. Rather than informing Congress or the American public about the president's condition, his wife Edith quietly took over managing White House operations herself. She decided which matters were important enough to bring to her husband and which ones she would handle. The United States was effectively being run by an unelected First Lady, and neither Congress nor the public was told anything about it. 58. During the Normandy breakout in August 1944, American bombers were sent to clear a path for advancing ground troops and accidentally dropped their bombs directly onto their own soldiers on the ground below. Then the next day they came back and did the exact same thing again for a second consecutive day. The friendly fire incident over 2 days killed over 100 Allied soldiers, including a general. The planes had mistaken the smoke signals their own troops were using as location markers for the target indicators they were supposed to bomb. 59. Socialist Eugene Debs stood up in Canton, Ohio in 1918 and gave a speech saying he personally believed that ordinary working-class Americans should not be forced to fight and die in European wars that had nothing to do with their daily lives. The U.S. government arrested him under the Espionage Act of 1917, put him on trial, and a judge sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison for expressing that opinion out loud. Debs ran for president from his prison cell in 1920 and received nearly 1 million votes. 60. Sears was once so completely dominant in American retail that their catalog sold entire houses. Not furniture for houses, not decorations for houses, but complete pre-cut house kits containing 30,000 individual pieces delivered directly to customers by freight train for self-assembly. At its peak, Sears ran 350,000 catalog pages annually and seemed completely unstoppable. Then, Amazon arrived and started selling everything Sears had ever sold, but faster and cheaper. Sears filed for bankruptcy in 2018, while Amazon was approaching a $1 trillion market valuation. 61. The U.S. Air Force spent $7.5 million taxpayer dollars running a classified program called Project Stargate from 1978 to 1995 that hired people who claimed they could see military targets remotely using only their minds. These were not scientists or soldiers. They were psychics. The Air Force paid them government salaries for 17 years to sit quietly and visualize enemy locations with their eyes closed. A formal government review eventually concluded the entire program had produced absolutely zero useful military intelligence in nearly 2 decades of psychic staring. 62. A woman named Joan Ginther, living in Texas, won the state lottery 4 completely separate times between 1993 and 2010, collecting over $20 million in total winnings. Lottery officials investigated her repeatedly and seriously for fraud after the second win, the third win, and again after the 4th win. Investigators examined everything about her background, her methods, and her purchase patterns exhaustively each time. Every single investigation reached the same conclusion that all 4 wins were statistically almost impossible but completely and entirely legitimate. She has never explained how she did it. 63. A man known only as D.B. Cooper boarded a Northwest Airlines flight in November 1971, handed a flight attendant a note claiming he had a bomb, demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes, received everything he asked for, waited until the plane was airborne over the Pacific Northwest, walked to the rear stairs, and jumped out of the back of a moving aircraft into a rainstorm at night. He was never identified. He was never found. It remains the only unsolved aircraft hijacking in the entire history of American aviation. 64. Thomas Edison decided the best way to prove that his rival's AC electrical current was dangerous was to publicly execute a circus elephant named Topsy in front of 1,500 live spectators and multiple film cameras in 1903. The elephant died in seconds from the electrical current. Edison then took the film footage and distributed it as widely as possible, hoping it would turn public opinion against AC power. Instead, the footage made Edison look like a man who had just electrocuted an elephant in front of a crowd for a business argument. 65. President Chester Arthur was so intensely secretive about his personal history that before he died, he gathered nearly all of his personal papers and private documents and burned them. The destruction of his records fueled a genuine, unresolved historical mystery about whether Arthur was actually born in Vermont, as he claimed, or across the border in Canada. If Arthur had been born in Canada, he would have been constitutionally ineligible to serve as president. He burned the evidence, took the secret to his grave, and historians are still arguing about it today. 66. A 9-year-old boy named John Lincoln Clem talked his way into the Union Army during the Civil War by showing up and refusing to leave until someone gave him a job. They made him a drummer. At 11 years old during the Battle of Chickamauga, a Confederate officer on horseback rode directly at young Clem and demanded his surrender. Clem raised his musket and shot the officer instead. The Union Army responded to this development by promoting an 11-year-old child to the rank of sergeant, making him the youngest non-commissioned officer in American military history. 67. When Congress moved into the brand new Capitol building in Washington, D.C. in 1800, they discovered the construction was so incomplete that the building was essentially an unfinished frozen shell. Members burned scrap wood they found lying around just to keep from freezing at their desks. Senators and representatives shared cramped bedrooms together in a single nearby boarding house like college freshmen. And the entire congressional library that was supposed to serve the legislative branch of the world's newest democracy contained exactly 740 books total, sitting on a handful of shelves. 68. A woman named Elizabeth Magie invented a board game in 1903, specifically designed to demonstrate to players how landlords exploit and extract wealth from tenants. The game was a direct educational tool about economic inequality. Decades later, Parker Brothers bought her patent for $500 with zero royalty agreement and renamed the game Monopoly. Parker Brothers made billions of dollars over the following century selling Elizabeth Magie's idea to the entire world. The company simultaneously and systematically erased her name from every version of the game's official history. 69. The Tuskegee syphilis study began in 1932 when U.S. Public Health Service doctors enrolled 399 black men in Alabama who had syphilis and told every single one of them they were receiving proper medical treatment for their condition. They were receiving nothing. Doctors deliberately left all 399 men completely untreated for decades while carefully documenting how the disease slowly destroyed their bodies over time. The study continued for 40 years. It was not shut down because the men got better. It was shut down in 1972 because a whistleblower leaked it to the press. 70. In the 1890s, respected American astronomers with genuine academic credentials and serious professional reputations became absolutely convinced they were receiving structured mathematical signals being transmitted from intelligent life living on Mars. And they held public lectures about it. They published papers about decoding the Martian messages. They organized serious academic debates about the best method of signaling back to Mars. Then, the scientific community quietly realized this was becoming a profound embarrassment, and the entire subject was dropped without formal retraction, as if the lectures had never happened. 71. Oil billionaire Harold Hamm went through a divorce, and his wife Sue Ann was awarded roughly $1 billion by the court as her settlement. Sue Ann looked at the billion-dollar check, decided it was not enough, and rejected it entirely. She appealed for more money through the courts. The case dragged through appeals for additional years. Hamm eventually sat down and personally signed a single handwritten check for $974,790,317 to finally resolve it. Sue Ann cashed that one. 72. In 1919, the U.S. Army decided to test whether the military could realistically move troops and equipment by road across the entire country in an emergency. They assembled a convoy in Washington, D.C., and started driving towards San Francisco. The convoy took 62 full days to complete the journey, averaging 5 miles per hour across the entire trip. Roads collapsed under the vehicles. Bridges failed. Trucks got stuck for hours in mud. A young Army officer named Dwight Eisenhower participated in the convoy and remembered how terrible American roads were for the rest of his life. 73. President Millard Fillmore was sitting at home one day when he discovered he had been nominated to run for Vice President of the United States. He did not receive an official notification, a telegram, or a personal visit from party leadership. He read about his own nomination in a newspaper like a regular civilian. Fillmore had also never personally met Zachary Taylor, the presidential candidate he was supposedly running alongside. The two men who won the election together and ran the country as president and vice president were complete strangers to each other on Election Day. 74. The USS Monitor was America's famous Civil War ironclad warship, and the U.S. Navy almost never built it. And the ship was designed by a Swedish engineer named John Ericsson, who approached the Navy with his revolutionary plans and was immediately dismissed as an eccentric crank whose ideas were not worth serious consideration. The Navy only reconsidered after they completely ran out of other options and had nothing left to try. The Monitor was accepted, rushed into construction, launched, and fought its most famous battle against the Confederate Merrimack just days after hitting the water for the first time. 75. The Tennessee Valley Authority began building its massive network of dams and reservoirs across Appalachia in the 1930s as a New Deal project to bring electricity to rural communities. The project required flooding enormous valleys. Inside those valleys were over 700 family cemeteries containing the graves of generations of Appalachian families. Workers disinterred thousands of bodies and relocated them while families stood on hillsides watching the rising water permanently swallow the burial grounds of their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. The government called it progress, and the families called it something else entirely. 76. John DeLorean spent years building his dream car company, and his famous stainless steel sports car became a cultural icon. Then he was arrested and charged with cocaine trafficking in a federal sting operation while his company was already collapsing financially. He fought the charges in court and was eventually acquitted on entrapment grounds. He walked out of the courtroom a free man and discovered his factory had been shut down, every investor had fled, and his entire life's work was gone. His car's most lasting legacy turned out to be appearing as a time machine in a movie. 77. In April 1947, a cargo ship called the Grand Camp, loaded with ammonium nitrate fertilizer, caught fire at the docks in Texas City, Texas. Firefighters responded and spectators gathered on the pier to watch. Then the ship exploded with such catastrophic force that it killed 581 people instantly, injured nearly 4,000 more, and was felt and heard 250 miles away. The blast hurled a 2-ton steel ship anchor through the air for over a mile like someone had thrown a javelin. It remains one of the deadliest industrial accidents in American history. 78. I.e., wealthy American women in the 1880s who complained of exhaustion, anxiety, or general unhappiness were diagnosed with a condition called neurasthenia and prescribed total complete bed rest by their physicians. The treatment meant no reading, no walking, no conversation, no visitors, and no mental stimulation of any kind for months at a stretch. Doctors genuinely believed that absolute inactivity was the medically correct cure for exhaustion. Patients who followed the prescribed treatment consistently reported feeling dramatically worse than before they started. Doctors prescribed more bed rest in response. 79. The Great Brinks robbery of 1950 was a perfectly executed $2.5 million heist that stumped investigators for years. Detectives had no solid leads, no witnesses, and no breaks in the case. The robbery was solved entirely because one of the 11 robbers simply could not stop talking about it at bars around Boston for 6 consecutive years after the crime. He eventually told the wrong person, who told the FBI. Investigators arrested the entire crew just 11 days before the statute of limitations would have permanently freed every single one of them forever. 80. The SS Eastland passenger ship was loaded with Western Electric factory workers and their families for a company picnic in Chicago in July 1915 and rolled completely over onto its side while still tied to the dock before leaving the harbor. 848 people died in the Chicago River in what became the deadliest disaster in Great Lakes history. Investigators discovered the catastrophe happened because safety modifications added to the ship after the Titanic disaster had raised the vessel's center of gravity so dramatically that the Titanic's safety reforms had directly caused the Eastland to capsize. 81. President Herbert Hoover stood before the American public repeatedly during the Great Depression and told them with complete confidence that economic recovery was right around the corner. He said it while unemployment climbed to 10%. He said it while unemployment climbed to 15%. He kept saying it while unemployment reached 25%, and families across the country were losing their homes and standing in bread lines. So unemployed Americans responded by building sprawling shanty towns in every major city and naming them Hoovervilles specifically to make sure everyone knew exactly who to blame. 82. The USS Vincennes was a heavily equipped American warship operating in the Persian Gulf in 1988, with some of the most sophisticated radar technology available to the military at that time. The crew picked up an aircraft on their radar and identified it as an Iranian fighter jet descending toward them in an attack approach. They fired 2 missiles and destroyed it. The aircraft was Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian Airbus carrying 290 passengers including 66 children, ascending normally on a scheduled commercial route. The radar operators had read the data completely backwards. 83. During Prohibition, the U.S. and government faced a problem where industrial alcohol was being stolen and redistilled into illegal drinking alcohol. Their solution was to order manufacturers to add deadly poisons, including methanol, directly into industrial alcohol supplies to deter people from drinking it. Americans drank it anyway because they had no way of knowing which supplies were poisoned. An estimated 10,000 Americans were killed by the government-mandated poisoned alcohol before officials finally acknowledged the policy was murdering the citizens. It was supposed to be protecting and quietly abandoned it. 84. AOL and Time Warner stood together in January 2000 and announced their merger as the single greatest business combination in the history of American capitalism. Executives beamed. Shareholders celebrated. E-business journalists called it visionary. Within 2 years, the combined company had managed to destroy over $200 billion in shareholder value through mismanagement, incompatibility, and spectacularly poor decisions. It became the most catastrophically value-destroying corporate merger ever recorded in American business history. The deal, that was supposed to define the future of media, became a masterclass in how to obliterate an enormous fortune. 85. The young women working at the U.S. Radium Corporation factory in New Jersey during the 1920s were given small brushes and instructed by their supervisors to lick the tips of the brushes to keep them fine and precise before dipping them into radium paint to decorate watch dials. The women did this dozens of times every single working day. Or meanwhile, in a completely separate section of the exact same building, the company's own chemists and executives worked carefully behind lead shields specifically installed to protect them from the radium those same women were licking. 86. In the fall of 2012, 18 teenage girls at a single high school in Leroy, New York, began developing sudden, uncontrollable twitching and involuntary physical movements with no apparent cause or trigger. The CDC sent investigators. Neurologists examined every affected student extensively. Environmental scientists tested the school building and surrounding land thoroughly. State health officials conducted their own independent review. Every agency investigated exhaustively and seriously. Not one of them ever found a single medical, environmental, neurological, or biological explanation for what happened to those 18 girls. The case remains officially unexplained. 87. The FBI's most wanted criminal throughout most of the 1930s was officially described in law enforcement documents as the cunning matriarch mastermind behind a murderous crime family terrorizing the Midwest. She was hunted for years as the dangerous brains of a violent gang. After she died in a shootout with federal agents, historians began reviewing the actual evidence more carefully. Their conclusion was that Ma Barker was most likely just an ordinary elderly woman who happened to be physically present while her adult sons committed serious crimes entirely on their own initiative without her direction. 88. The Liberty Bell arrived from London in 1752, and workers decided to test it by ringing it for the very first time. It cracked immediately on the first strike. Workers melted it down and recast it. It cracked again. They melted it down and recast it a second time. The recast bell served for decades until George Washington's birthday in 1846, when the city of Philadelphia rang it in his honor and it cracked again permanently. The bell that symbolizes American freedom has been completely silent ever since because every attempt to ring it has ended in immediate structural failure. 89. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson spent years as fierce, bitter political rivals who genuinely despised each other before eventually reconciling in old age through a long correspondence. Both men were among the last surviving founders of the United States. Both men died on July 4, 1826, which was exactly 50 years to the day after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The timing alone would be remarkable enough. John Adams reportedly used some of his final breath to say that Thomas Jefferson still survived. Jefferson had already been dead for 5 hours when Adams said it. 90. During the Korean War, American military jets made a significant navigation error in 1952 and accidentally attacked the city of Halmstad in Sweden, strafing civilian targets in a neutral country that had absolutely no involvement in the conflict whatsoever. Sweden was not at war with anyone. The jets attacked anyway by mistake. While both the United States government and the Swedish government were so deeply embarrassed by the incident that they jointly classified all information about it and kept the attack completely secret from the public for over 60 years before it finally came out. 91. Mississippi ratified the constitutional amendment banning alcohol in 1918 and felt very strongly about it. Then, in 1933, when the rest of the country came to its senses and ratified the amendment repealing Prohibition, Mississippi simply did not participate. Nobody followed up. Nobody sent a reminder. The repeal went into effect everywhere else, and Mississippi continued operating under its own ratification of the ban as if nothing had changed. The state remained technically and legally dry under its own paperwork until 1966, when someone finally noticed and Mississippi quietly ratified the repeal 33 years late. 92. The Fire Festival promised wealthy ticket buyers a luxury music experience on a private island in the Bahamas, with celebrity performers, gourmet food, and exclusive accommodations for ticket prices reaching $12,000. Organizer Billy McFarland promoted it aggressively using paid celebrity social media endorsements, showing beautiful models on pristine beaches. Attendees flew in from across the country and arrived to find disaster relief tents, no performers, and a now legendary meal of pre-packaged cheese slices on soggy bread served in a styrofoam container. McFarland received 6 years in federal prison. 93. The world's first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction was achieved secretly underneath the football stadium at the University of Chicago in 1942 by a team of scientists working on the Manhattan Project. The reactor worked. The achievement was historic. The designated emergency safety mechanism, if readings suddenly spiked to dangerous levels, was a single man standing on the structure holding an axe whose only job was to cut a specific rope if something went wrong. The backup safety plan for the first nuclear reactor in human history was one guy with an axe and a rope. 94. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake caused enormous damage and immediately ignited fires across the city that threatened to consume everything remaining. The U.S. Army arrived to help and decided the best strategy was to dynamite entire city blocks to create fire breaks that would stop the flames from spreading further. The dynamiting was executed so poorly and so carelessly that the explosions ignited brand new fires in areas that had survived the earthquake completely undamaged. The Army's well-intentioned firefighting intervention ultimately destroyed more buildings in San Francisco than the original earthquake had managed to destroy on its own. 95. Lynette Fromm was a follower of Charles Manson, who walked up to President Gerald Ford in Sacramento, California in September 1975 and pointed a loaded semi-automatic pistol directly at him from approximately 2 feet away. A Secret Service agent lunged forward and grabbed the weapon before she could fire. The agent then examined the gun and made a discovery that changed the entire nature of the incident. Fromm had loaded the pistol with ammunition, but had forgotten to chamber a round, meaning the gun was physically incapable of firing, even if she had pulled the trigger repeatedly. 96. President James Garfield was shot by an assassin named Charles Guiteau at a Washington, D.C. train station in July 1881, and initial medical assessments suggested he had a reasonable chance of survival. Then his doctors got involved. Over the following weeks, a rotating team of physicians inserted their completely unsterilized, unwashed fingers directly into the bullet wound over 80 separate times, searching manually for the bullet they could not locate. Garfield died 79 days after being shot not from the bullet, but from the massive systemic infection his own doctors introduced by repeatedly probing his wound with dirty hands. 97. The Pentagon was designed in 1941 as the new headquarters for the United States Department of Defense, and engineers drew up plans that included twice the number of bathrooms that the building's actual occupancy would ever require. The reason was not poor planning or excess caution. Virginia's segregation laws at the time legally required completely separate bathroom facilities for black and white workers throughout the entire building. President Roosevelt reviewed the finished building before its official opening, quietly had every single piece of segregation signage removed from the walls, and said nothing publicly about why the building had so many bathrooms. 98. In 1971, investigators discovered that a sitting member of the United States House of Representatives had been operating his official congressional office as a functional front for organized crime activities. The congressman had been using the resources, staff, and credibility of his elected government position to facilitate criminal operations. The detail that elevated this beyond ordinary political corruption was that this same congressman had been simultaneously serving on the House Subcommittee on Privacy and the Protection of Individual Rights while running organized crime out of the office next door. 99. Coca-Cola approached the United States government during World War II and made a straightforward argument that their carbonated beverage was essential to the morale and fighting effectiveness of American military forces overseas. The government found this argument completely convincing. Coca-Cola received an official wartime exemption from sugar rationing that allowed the company to produce unlimited quantities of Coke, while ordinary American families were carefully rationing their sugar at home. The federal government essentially became a global Coca-Cola distributor, ensuring their product reached every military base on Earth at government expense. 100. The U.S. government launched its very own federally operated lottery in 1868, specifically to raise reconstruction funds for New Orleans following the Civil War. Officials began organizing ticket sales and distribution, and then someone checked the existing laws. A congressional statute already on the books made it explicitly illegal to mail lottery tickets through the United States Postal Service. The government's own postal service was therefore legally required to confiscate the government's own lottery mailings. Congress had created a lottery that their own laws made it illegal to operate and had to pass a special exemption to sell tickets for their own game. 101. Thalidomide was approved across Europe in the late 1950s as a treatment for morning sickness in pregnant women and caused thousands of severe birth defects across the continent. An FDA reviewer named Frances Kelsey received the American approval application and simply refused to approve it. Odd pharmaceutical company representatives pressured her repeatedly, complained about her to her supervisors, and demanded she sign off quickly. She refused every single time for years. Her stubborn refusal to approve one drug without sufficient safety evidence single-handedly prevented the same epidemic of birth defects from devastating the United States. 102. In 1999, American fast food chains began including Pokémon toys inside children's meals, and the demand became so immediately and overwhelmingly insane that childless grown adults began lining up alone at drive-thrus, ordering dozens of Happy Meals in a single visit just to collect the toys. Locations across the country ran out of toys within hours of opening each morning. The shortage became so severe and the adult behavior so bizarre that McDonald's received an official congressional inquiry asking questions about whether the company was artificially creating toy scarcity to manipulate consumer demand. 103. The largest horse theft operation in American history ran quietly and successfully for nearly a decade across the Midwest during the 1970s. A sophisticated multi-state criminal network stole over 35,000 horses by carefully altering their brand markings and forging official registration paperwork. They then sold the stolen animals openly through completely legitimate registered auction houses alongside legally owned horses. Nobody working at those auction houses caught anything suspicious. No law enforcement agency connected the pattern for nearly 10 years until the entire operation finally unraveled under the weight of its own scale. 104. Congress passed the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1916, providing federal funding to build roads across America, and everyone celebrated the beginning of a connected national transportation network. Then someone read the actual legislation carefully. The law contained absolutely no requirement that any state connect its new roads to the roads being built in neighboring states. Each state built whatever roads it wanted, going wherever it chose, stopping wherever it felt like stopping. The resulting national highway system featured roads that simply ended at state borders and resumed randomly on the other side with no connection between them. 105. A 17-year-old Boy Scout named David Hahn decided in 1994 that his next merit badge project would be building a nuclear reactor in his mother's garden shed in Gulf Manor, Michigan. He collected radioactive materials by dismantling hundreds of household smoke detectors and camping lanterns. He built a working radioactive neutron source. Neighbors noticed the shed was emitting radiation and called authorities. The Environmental Protection Agency arrived, assessed the situation, declared the garden shed an official Superfund hazardous waste site, and transported its radioactive contents to a licensed nuclear waste disposal facility in Utah. 106. The U.S. A Navy assembled a fleet of 95 target ships at Bikini Atoll in the Pacific in 1946 to test the destructive power of atomic weapons in a series of nuclear detonations. 2 bombs were detonated. Navy officials inspected the results and discovered a deeply inconvenient problem. Dozens of ships had survived both blasts completely intact and were floating perfectly fine. However, every surviving ship had become so lethally and thoroughly radioactive that no sailor could board any of them without receiving a fatal dose of radiation. The Navy had to sink their own surviving fleet using torpedoes fired from a safe distance. 107. Congress passed the Comstock Act in 1873, making it explicitly illegal to mail lottery advertising through the United States Postal Service. And in that exact same year, Congress turned around and officially chartered the Louisiana State Lottery Company as a legally operating enterprise. The Louisiana Lottery sold its tickets exclusively and entirely through the United States mail. Congress had banned lottery mailings, and then immediately created a government-backed lottery that could only function through lottery mailings. They then had to pass a special congressional exemption specifically for their own lottery to allow it to legally use the postal service they had just banned it from. 108. The hoverboard became the single most desired Christmas gift in America during the 2015 holiday season, and retailers could not keep them in stock. Then the Consumer Product Safety Commission began receiving reports of the boards catching fire in living rooms and bedrooms across the country. Investigators launched a sweeping recall and examined every brand on the market. They discovered that not one single manufacturer selling hoverboards in America had independently designed their own product. Every brand from every company had simply copied the identical blueprint from the same anonymous Chinese factory and slapped their own logo on the outside. 109. The Hubble Space Telescope was the most ambitious and expensive space observatory ever built. When it launched in April 1990, after 2 decades of careful development and $1.5 billion in costs. Scientists pointed it at the universe, and the photographs came back blurry and completely useless. Engineers investigated and discovered the primary mirror had been polished to the incorrect curvature by an error measuring just 2.2 micrometers, smaller than a single human hair. The most expensive telescope ever built was essentially a very costly blurry camera for its first 3 years of operation. 110. In 2013, American consumers spent over $1.2 billion purchasing celebrity-endorsed detox and cleanse products that promise to flush toxins, reset metabolism, and transform health through special proprietary formulas. Medical researchers decided to systematically analyze every major product on the market. They examined the ingredient lists, the formulas, and the biological claims thoroughly. Their findings were consistent across virtually every single product tested, and the only biologically active ingredient present in almost all of them was a standard over-the-counter laxative available at any pharmacy for under $3. 111. 8 Chicago White Sox players agreed before the 1919 World Series to deliberately lose the games in exchange for payment from gamblers who had bet heavily against them. The players threw the series, took their money, and got caught. They were put on criminal trial for conspiracy in 1921, and a jury acquitted all 8 of them. The players walked out of the courtroom legally innocent free men. Baseball Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis was waiting. He immediately and permanently banned all 8 players from professional baseball for life anyway, a ban that has remained completely unlifted for over 100 years. And that is 111 of the dumbest moments in American history. Real people, real decisions, real disasters. And somehow these are the same people who built the most powerful nation on Earth, which honestly explains a lot. America was never perfect. It was just entertaining. If this video had you shaking your head and laughing at the same time, then you are exactly where you belong. Welcome to Dumb History. Hit that like button right now if you learned something today that your history teacher definitely left out. Subscribe to Dumb History because we are just getting started and there are hundreds more of these stories waiting for you. And drop a comment below telling us which one of these 111 moments made you say out loud, "What is wrong with these people?" We read every single one. See you in the next video.